Okay, we'll get going. Call the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Stewart. I'm the mayor, and I will be chairing this meeting of council. And I wanted to open tonight with a comment that we've had a discussion about a newspaper article that came out this morning in the Vancouver Sun, a plea to Metro residents, open your doors to Syrians. And in it, there's reference made to cities and their potential role in this. I have a long-standing passion for the plight of refugees, and one of the things that does is it means that Mr. Friesen from Immigrant Services Society phoned me last week and sent some documents over, and I've shared them with council, essentially trying to work on the challenge that has been put forward by a federal government promise, a federal government commitment to settle 25,000 refugees in the next 7 weeks. That's an enormously daunting task. I don't know how they're going to do it. Nonetheless, I have agreed to be participating tomorrow in a call to action organized at this press conference organized by Immigrant Services Society to try to, I guess, mobilize those groups and individuals in our region that want to help, and to make them understand and try to perhaps guide in some way the forces of community that want to open their doors and want to try to embrace the challenge that is put before us with millions of folks from Syria that are homeless now and countryless. In that article, and apparently in the federal plan, we know little about it right now, but it talks about 2,700 of those 25,000, about 10%, which is commensurate with our population, would come to Metro Vancouver. Of those, let's face it, Coquitlam has long been one of the most significant, the second most significant receivers of refugees over the years, and so it is suggested in the document from ISS that we would receive somewhere around 595, 600 of those refugees, and all of that is laid out in a plan that's been published by Immigrant Services Society. We assume, with the knowledge and agreement of the federal government in ISS's capacity as the lead agency involved in settlement of refugees in British Columbia. All of that is to say that the city is not really involved. The city doesn't have a role in trying to work out how this thing could happen. Essentially the call is out to community groups, and call is out to individuals, and call is out to community to determine how and which doors and how quickly and how we can possibly make welcome 2,700 in Metro Vancouver and possibly 600 of them in Coquitlam. Last time this happened on a scale like this was the call in 2009. I was just newly elected as mayor, and we attended meetings with ISS at the time related to the Bhutanese refugees. The Bhutanese had spent, these are refugees that had been kicked out of Bhutan. They were not ethnically Bhutanese, they were ethnically Nepalese, most of them, and they were sent back to Nepal and ended up in Nepalese refugee camps for 20 years. Families that had been living 20 years in a refugee camp, and the determination was made that Canada would take a bunch of these and that Coquitlam would take 900 of them. That didn't unfold as planned, but a great many community groups came together at the time and put together plans over the course of many months, not 6 weeks, but many months, to put together the plans to accept 900 Bhutanese refugees, and I'm really proud of the way our community came together at that point. The Syrian refugee crisis is unfolding for Canada in terms of this commitment much faster than that, and so tomorrow I as me, will be joining with ISS and perhaps mayors from other communities in asking our community in Metro Vancouver to open their doors, to asking churches. I know of several churches in Coquitlam that are already working on that plan to apply for and sponsor a refugee family. And that challenge is before us all, but I just wanted to make clear that this isn't the city. This is not, don't look to the city for the city staff or the city doing this. This is community. The residents of Coquitlam, the community groups of Coquitlam, and that's who the call to action is being placed to. So I thank you for that. Good. Mr. Clarke.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our first item this evening is a presentation from the Coquitlam Foundation. I'd like to invite Janet Toddington, Chair, and Jill Cook, Executive Director, to come forward.
Mayor Stewart, members of City Council, City staff, and members of the public, good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to make our presentation. I'm Janet Toddington, Chair of the Coquitlam Foundation, and with me is Jill Cook, our Executive Director. We're here to provide Council with our annual report on the Foundation's status and activities during the last year. We also want to use this opportunity to mark National Philanthropy Day, which is upcoming on November the 15th. We all know just how important philanthropy is to the well-being of our global and our local communities. And as we've just heard from Mayor Stewart, the global part is going to impact on our community quite significantly in the near future. We're a nonprofit charitable organization established in 1992 by BC statute. Our mission is to encourage and support creative, targeted philanthropy that builds a vibrant, sustainable, and healthy community. With us this evening are many of our board members. Mayor Stewart is on the board to represent the city. Chuck Dennison represents School District 43, and Randy Webster is the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce representative. Our board directors also include Vice Chair Ken Catton, who is with us this evening, Justin Kim, our Secretary, Justina Mark, our Treasurer, Ron Grender, who is with us this evening, Madhavi Imandar, Linda Meneghello, who is also with us this evening, Colleen Talbot, and Terry O'Neill. All of our directors are hardworking, committed volunteers from our community. Our staff members are Jill Cook, our Executive Director, and Margaret Owens is our Foundation's Administrative Assistant. Now, here's the schematic of how the Foundation works to manage philanthropic donations. We prudently invest the funds to ensure that a gift to the Foundation continues to give well into the future. The interest generated is then distributed through community grants, bursaries, and scholarships. In this way, the Foundation is able to support organizations and students in our community. And as you can see in the slide, the wide-ranging needs and interests that we support on the right-hand side of the slide. The Foundation invests and manages over 25 funds of two types: those managed directly and those established by donors who wish to support a specific interest or purpose. The Foundation-directed funds support a variety of purposes. Our community fund covers a number of objects to meet our mission of encouraging and supporting creative, targeted philanthropy. These other funds that we have listed on the slide are important interests and areas requiring support in our industry. These family and memorial funds include those established by families to provide grant monies for physical and mental well-being, athletics, health research, the arts, and education. So we have quite a few different funds that are established for those ends. And a number of donor-advised funds have been established by local agencies in our community to support these specific activities and goals. And we have specialty funds that support interests such as cultural diversity, literacy, post-secondary education, trades training, as well as challenging medical conditions. Our newest fund is one established by the Seroptimist International of the Tri-Cities. With this fund, we will be able to support their goals of helping women and girls in need, suffering in poverty or homelessness, and to support programs to educate, empower, and enable women and girls in the area of health and wellness and protection against domestic violence. And now I'll turn the podium over to Jill to explain the numbers.
Yes, Janet has given me the graphing exercise. So what we have here, and I think the visual is always a good thing to have in front of us, is we've taken a look at what our assets have been over the last 9 years and graphed them. And I think it's pretty easy to see that even through the tough times of 08 and 09, that we managed to maintain a positive trend, that we are now sitting at assets of 2.763. And this is as a result of a lot of community work, a lot of outreach, a lot of awareness building, and an amazing group of volunteer board members who continue to get the word out and let people know that this is where the community, the heart of our charitable community rests. So that's the asset growth. The next graph I'm going to put up is actually our disbursements. How many awards have we given out? What does that look like over the last 9 years? And as you can see, after our award cycle in 08 would have, it would have been in June. We would have made those announcements, and it would have been, I think, in September when we had all the wrinkles in the market, if I remember correctly. And as a result of that, you can see 09, 10, 11, 12, we have a bit of a flatter time in terms of what we're able to disperse, because when we give out money from the foundation, we always guard the principal of that money. So we're only able to give out back in most cases what the interest is or the excess that is in those funds. However, 13, 14, and 15, we had record yield years in 13, 14. We're looking at 10.6 for some of those years. So the ability of the foundation to grant more has been increased, and to the point at 2015, we were able to give out 160,000 in grants, which is a pretty stellar year and a pretty banner year for a community foundation. So the graphs have shown you with a picture what the numbers here reflect as well. So interesting thing here is the interest on investments for 14-15 was 3.2%. So we're back into a much more, a less volatile market, a lower yield market. So, what the next 2 years are going to look like for us, well, time will tell. We'll see what our numbers come in like. And so there it is. Our annual report, our financial report was published in the paper, but it's also available on our website. So if you want to take a closer look at those numbers, they're there for you to see. So, sort of the biggest thing that we do all year, we spend all year preparing for the awards night, receiving the applications, and then we actually get to celebrate with the event. And these are just some slides of what a great event it was. A lot of worthy recipients, a lot of community involvement. So there's a number of key goals that we must look at in terms of self-sustaining. Obviously, for the foundation to continue its good work, we have to maintain the assets that we have. But to grow, we need to attract more donations. We have to grow the funds that we already have and become a bigger part of the community through greater assets and greater distribution of those assets. So that's one of our key goals. We have to manage that growth effectively. There's a later slide that we'll refer to that talks about how lean we are and how we manage what we do now. But I think if there's sort of one thing, a takeaway from this slide, and it's sort of come home to me since I've taken the job, I'm new to the job for those of you who don't necessarily know that, is when I say I'm working for the Coquitlam Foundation, some of the questions that I hear are, so what does the foundation do? And what does that mean for me? And do I know somebody who's received money from a foundation? There's a certain amount of an ephemeral nature of what the foundation does, and I think that that's a big part of what we need to do is do a little more storytelling. Let people know that once you put your money in that foundation, that it's there to give back to the community for a very long time, and that it's a very different notion than when you just make a donation to a charity. We are modest. If I thought heritage was modest, and I did, this is a very lean operating machine. There is no doubt about it. We are the working board, volunteer-driven, amazing energy. No permanent staff, contracted staff only. No office. We're in the cloud. We are literally we do everything in the cloud. The only way we can generate money to sort of maintain the lean operations that we do have is through our fees on donor advised funds, which are 1.25%, but 0.5% of that actually goes to the company which manages the portfolio. So when we do a fundraiser, we do it with a very specific cause in mind, and that is to generate money for our operating expenses. Any other money that comes to us goes directly into funds that are given back to the community. I'm not going to ask Janet to back up the slide, but there was a number up there that Community Foundations Canada had indicated to us when we met with them about a month ago, that in order to be self-sustaining, the foundation should be at about a $5 million asset level. And by self-sustaining, we mean full-time, maybe one full-time staff person, and maybe some kind of small storefront office so we could handle applications and answer questions and just have a bit more visibility. So clearly, you know, that can be our goal over the years to move toward that. So the call for action, you know, it is National Giving Week, and we're really happy to talk about our last year and the successes that we have had. But moving forward, I think that council and mayor have been fabulous in getting the word out to the community about what a good organization we are. But I think going forward, we can do more of that. If you know of somebody who's thinking has a small endowment, or they have some charitable purpose and they're looking for some assistance or advice, please send them our way. We're happy to talk to them. We need as many qualified volunteers as we can get because they do the work. And please feel free to come out to any of our fun events. And with that in mind, woohoo!
So you have a fun event coming up.
Here we are, people.
Yes, it's that time of year.
Yes. Pardon me? You like it? It's good, eh? Yeah.
Look over at Mr. O'Neill there. On November 14th, we're going to have a hoot and holler and time, toe tap and music. We're going to have great food. Where did that come in my book? Live and silent auctions and country-style dancing. So come channel your inner cowboy or cowgirl and support your foundation.
Really good food.
We just have a few pictures from last year, as a matter of fact. And as Jill mentioned, this is our main fundraiser for the year, and we're looking forward to a sellout. I think pretty close to a sellout.
We're down to 5 tickets. That's what I hear.
So any tickets are wanting out there?
You got yours?
Brent's gone, right? I look forward to that. I'll take my hat off.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
Yeehaw.
Yeehaw. So just in our ending our presentation for this evening, when your heart tells you it's time to help people in your community and you don't know where to turn, it's time to look to the Coquitlam Foundation. We're your hometown partner in philanthropy, helping you to help your neighbors through charitable initiatives as simple as a one-time donation or as profound as a establishment of an endowment fund. Look to the Coquitlam Foundation when you're looking to help your community. Thank you very, very much for your time and attention.
Well, thank you. I want to apologize because I know you had committed to keeping to the 5 minutes we had allotted, but I had forgotten to turn the timer on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I will make it up to you, perhaps, as one of the things I was able to do as mayor was establish a self-directed fund. And I just want to urge folks out there that if you do want, if you or your organization you work with, or your family, perhaps a memorial in memory of somebody that has left us, if you want to establish such a fund that would be able to help people in perpetuity, help the community, contact the Coquitlam Foundation. They've got lots of opportunity. They can guide you through a really simple process, and charitable donations are then tax deductible. There's all kinds of reasons why it's a good process to go through if you want to be philanthropic or establish a philanthropic process, perhaps in concert with National Philanthropy Day next week. So
Indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Clarke.
Thank you, Your Worship. Next item, item 2, is the minutes of the regular council meeting held on Monday, November 2nd. Recommendation to approve.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, second by Councillor Towner. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3 is the informal notes of the Sustainability and Environmental Advisory Committee meeting of Tuesday, October 13th. Recommendation to receive.
Moved by Councillor Hutchinson, second by Councillor Zerillo. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4 is fourth and final reading of Stream and Drainage Protection Amendment, System Protection Amendment Bylaw number 4606. Staff recommendations that council give fourth and final reading to City of Coquitlam Stream and Drainage System Protection Amendment Bylaw number 4606.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, seconded by Councillor Marsden. And before we do that, I'll just correct, that was the seconder on the last item was Councillor Reid. Okay, seeing no speakers on this item, moved and seconded, all in favor, opposed, carried unanimously.
Item 5 is a development variance permit authorization for 1411 Pipeline Road. Prior to reading the staff recommendation, I would request that the mayor call for speakers.
So on development variance permits, this item and the next item, we call for a mini public hearing. Are there any speakers that wish to address this item? Are there any speakers to this item? Third and final time, are there any speakers to the item at 1411 Pipeline? Seeing none. Mr. Clarke.
Thank you, Worship. The staff recommendations that council approve the signing and sealing of the development variance permit, and that the mayor and city clerk for 1411 Pipeline Road, and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute it.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously.
Next item, item 6, is also a development variance permit authorization. This is for 3531 to 3553 Harper Road, 1440 to 1442, and 1456 to 1468 Strawline Hill Street. Prior to reading recommendation, I would ask the mayor to call for speakers.
Same thing. Are there any speakers to this item on Harper Road and Strawline Hill Street? Is there anyone here that's ever heard of Strawline Hill Street? Second time, are there any speakers to this item? On the third and final time, are there any speakers to this item? Councillor Zerillo.
I'm a speaker to this item.
Well,
I just have a few questions about the RS9. So I just want to understand if RS9 allows for suites, and if it does allow for suites, is this impacting the suite parking? Was the third parking spot always going to be outside? I just want to have an understanding of how this differs from having, is this accommodating suites, or were suites going to happen anyway?
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and good evening. No, what's under the RS9 zone, secondary suites are permitted. Just as in the RS8, RS7, RS1, secondary suites are permitted accessory use. If someone was wishing to put a secondary suite, they would have to provide a second or a third parking stall, an additional parking stall for the suite, in addition to the two for the principal dwelling. In this instance here, what they are requesting is that rather than just having two parking spaces in a garage, they're going to a third. So they're adding an extra parking stall that may be in support of a secondary suite, or it may just be to provide additional parking area for the principal dwelling.
Okay, and so then we have a narrower exit or access point as we come off the road, right? Is it double wide, double car width access point into the driveway where the third garage is going to have to be accessed by the two aprons, or is it one? Like, I'm trying to understand how the third parking spot is going to be unencumbered if it's a rented suite that's using that third spot.
Through the chair, if you look at attachment 2 on the report, it shows a generic site plan of one of the subject lots with the proposed dwelling and the 3-car garage, 2-car garage towards the center, and the third stall off to the I guess the left-hand side of the property. It's the access to that third garage is straight from the driveway. The notion of having the driveway a standard width is just that, is to ensure that the driveway is not extra wide along this roadway, which would diminish the amount of on-street parking potential. It would significantly widen the driveway letdown. So the idea is that and staff are recommending permit the third garage, but have that taper back into a standard driveway at the sidewalk area. So there should be sufficient room, both lengthwise and widthwise, within that driveway to allow for vehicle movement in and out of the garages and onto the road.
Because that's my concern. You're right, like it's narrowing down there, but if we end up the main residents use all 3 spots and then they ask their suite person to park on the road, I'm just not for that. So I'm just wanting to make sure that there's not going to have to knock on doors to maneuver cars to get out, because we have narrowed the exit. All right, thank you.
Okay, but on that point, to be clear, the third garage is a bonus. It doesn't take away from, well, yeah, I guess the argument might be that if it gets used for parking, then it does take away the apron as a parking space. Is there a prohibition to widening the apron to the property line in this instance?
Yeah, for a couple factors come into play, and perhaps Michael can help me with this as well. I'm understanding is a standard a driveway width that we try to achieve. Because again, going along these roads, if you have an extra wide driveway and you have a couple of those, especially they're side by side, it just ends up being virtually all driveway and very little curb space. The layout here, though, would enable, again, access into the garages and the ability to back out without having to conflict with other movements. But Michael, anything further on the layout you could offer?
Through your worship, one of the other reasons why we don't want to widen the letdown is we want to maximize on-street parking.
I said apron.
Oh, the apron, sorry. The house would have been built the same. They're giving up gross floor area for that third car garage. So the apron width is what you would see at standard RS9 lots up in Burke Mountain.
I guess I mean driveway then. Okay, I'm referring to the portion of the front yard that is now going to be concrete or some form of pavement. There isn't a prohibition to it. In the case of attachment 2, and I apologize, I was just doing this as a clarification, but there isn't a prohibition to paving this part right at the bottom of that drawing, that right up to the fence or the property line, to give it, give the tenant, if you wanted to move the tenant off of the driveway toward that third garage, you could move the tenant right up to the property line. There is not a prohibition to doing that.
That is correct, Your Worship.
Okay, so
No prohibition.
yes, prior to the variance, that's what they would typically do, is they would pave some portion of the front yard to accommodate the car that wasn't in line with the driveway that wasn't on the driveway to the front, to the garage entrances. And in this case, they could still do that off to the side. I'm clearly not making myself clearly. Okay, great. And the answer is yes.
To Your Worship, that is correct, yes.
Thank you. There we go. Sorry about that. Councillor Asmundson, you're next.
Thank you. So this is a regular driveway standard for a double-car garage at the letdown onto the roadway. It's not a single. It's be for the regular two-car garage. That width.
To Your Worship, that is correct.
Okay. Now, when I looked at this in this drawing, this driveway area could probably, as I look at, probably maybe fit 6 cars if they're having visitors on the paved, concreted driveway area through all the 3 garages off-street.
5 to 6 cars, to Your Worship, 5 to 6 cars. These are larger lots than some of the largest lots in Northeast Coquitlam.
Yeah, so there's a fair bit of room for spacing. And I think, to myself, we talk about parking in the Northeast. Adding a second garage is helping taking parking off the street and putting it in on the site. And the garage there will also accommodate the not need for parking on the street for visitors and taking up space in the street. And I think, I agree with what Mayor Stewart said, you could possibly widen, but I even think with the width of this driveway here, that you have a lot of space even to park a 3rd car without being obstructive to anything getting in and out for a tenant on the driveway off the street on this item. So I think I like this. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Just wanted to confirm, so that these proposed designs for the 3-car garage, that would all be on one side of the street. The other side of the street would be regular 2-car garage designs. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct. And one of the reasons for that is these are what we call uphill lots. So the lot rises from the road up through the length of the property, in which enables you to sort of tuck the garage areas sort of at grade down below the main living levels of the house. And this has been done pretty successfully in other subdivisions in the Northeast.
And I believe this proponent did the same thing last year. And any concerns with how that went in terms of parking for suites or anything like that? I can't remember what the driveway configurations were for those, but.
Through Your Worship, no, we have not.
And if the city was to decide to start enforcing its parking bylaw for suites, Mayor Stewart talked about paving the side setback. Could they also, on that attachment 2, the middle tree there, could they actually widen, put a parking pad where that middle tree is, similar to what they were doing in the proposal for the pipeline development? Parking pads sort of off the driveways.
Yes, as long as the parking is on the property, not within the road allowance.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, we lost the speaker. Okay. Are there council members? We'll do this again. Are there any other speakers to this item? DVP public hearing. Are there any other speakers to this item? The third and final time. Any other speakers to this item? Seeing none, we'll declare that part closed. Mr. Clarke.
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff recommendation for this development hearing permits is to approve the signing and sealing of the DVP for the addresses on Harper Road and Strawline Hill Street before you, and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute it.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor Towner. Councillor Zarrillo.
I'm fine with this, and I'll be voting in favor, but I just wanted to mention through the chair to staff is actually on these larger properties like that, I'm actually okay to think about not accommodating on-street parking. I think that the idea of parking is to accommodate the cars off the street. So I think it's been said around this council table before, and I just wanted to reiterate it tonight that we should be thinking about not offering on-street parking as a accommodation. Roads are made for driving, not for parking. So I just wanted to put that forward to staff, that I'd be open to looking at stuff where we're not trying to squeeze every on-street parking stall, especially up here on Burke Mountain. Thank you.
Okay, of course, we're on a DVP. Any other speakers? Seeing none, the motion is the variance permit. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. With our thanks to Morningstar.
Next item, item 7, is zoning amendment bylaw number 4624. This is for a proposed childcare facility at 283 Hart Street. Staff recommendations that council give first reading to see if Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4624, and that council waive the holding of a public hearing on the City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw 4624 under the authority of section 890, subsection 4 of the Local Government Act.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Cirillo. This is, by way of explanation, an unusual circumstance. I can't remember the last time, and it wasn't while I was mayor that we did this. We've had several public hearings on this particular property, and this motion is to waive the public hearing in this instance and to go ahead and reestablish, well, to go through with a zoning amendment. No speakers, all in favor? Opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Next item, item 8, is zoning amendment bylaw number 4625. This is for 509 and 513 Clarke Road. Staff recommendations that council give first reading to see if Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4625 and that bylaw number 4625 be referred to public hearing.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, second by Councillor Marsden. All in favor? Councillor O'Neill. Your second, 1 second. There you go.
Just want to say I'm most pleased to put this forward to a public hearing. Once the agenda was out, I shared the sketch of the proposed building with somebody who I know is very active and very interested in the shape of Coquitlam and the buildings that come up there. And she was very impressed with the artistry of the design, the swooping line on the side of the building. Something a little different. Doesn't look like it probably wouldn't be that much more expensive than a regular building. And it just adds a real nice little touch. So I encourage the architects involved with the projects that are reshaping Coquitlam and other parts of the city to be a little inventive like this. It's attachment 3, if it can be shown. But anyway, I quite liked it, and it's a simple, I think, variation, and I think it adds quite nicely.
Here, I'll show it for the folks at home. They could squint a bit. Just go to the website, and you'll find the agenda, and it's right there, attachment 3. I agree. Sorry. It's actually quite a nice little design element.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh. Motion is first reading and a public hearing. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Item number 9 is zoning amendment bylaw application for 945 and 951 Charland Avenue. Staff recommendations that council refer this application back to staff to continue working with the applicant to revise the proposal in order to ensure that it's more consistent with the zoning bylaw and the requested RM3 zone.
Moved by Councillor Reid. Okay, does someone else have it? Seconded by Councillor Asmundson. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. So this would, we had several options to do with this one. I for one, am quite impressed with what the applicants are putting forward here. But I do know that staff and I have some concerns, and I certainly respect those concerns because it's a very professional, hardworking staff. So I want to make sure that our staff can get together with these folks and make this work. And I want to make sure that staff understands that I, for one, and maybe other councillors will talk towards this. We're very enthusiastic, or at least I'm enthusiastic about wanting to see this go forward in some way. You know, we don't know the final shape of it or not, but it's certainly the the requested variances that are going forward are, from staff's point of view, problematic. The applicants have put forward some good comebacks to that. They make sense to me, but I'm not sure if staff has had time to look at the applicants' positions on these as thoroughly as they should. One thing I wanted to point out was that in the staff report on page 5, it talks about an objective that we have of the draft housing affordability strategy is to have affordable projects like this in close proximity to transit service, commercial services, and public amenities. The staff comeback to that was that this is not near a rapid transit line, which is true, and not located along a frequent transit network, which is also true. But our policy doesn't say close proximity to rapid transit. It doesn't say close proximity to frequent transit. It says close proximity to transit service. And there's bus stop right there. I think I looked it up, and yes, it was Route 152, I think, goes past there. And during peak hours in the morning rush hour, which I looked at, there's quite a regular bus, 10, 15 minutes, and then it slows off during the middle of the day, then it gets more frequent at the afternoon rush hour. So that's pretty good as well. So I think that's something that, so our policy, the way it exists right now in draft form, does not say that it needs to be near frequent transit networks. So I don't know why staff put that in there. The other concern that staff has put forward is that our existing policy on things like this talks about a certain size of amenity space that must be in buildings. I lived in several rental buildings when I was younger, and I don't recall ever having any amenity space in a rental building. I think it might be that our policy is a policy designed for condominium projects that people own. They want to have the gym, and they want to have a party room, and they want to have an outdoor space and everything. People who rent are basically, they don't expect that, as far as I know. I certainly never expected something like that, and I don't know if people expect to have a big amenity space these days. So that's something I would really encourage staff to take a look at as well. I want to see staff support this, and I really don't know why they can't, with a little harder work here, to bring forward something that they can live with, that's also make sure that this project will proceed to the rezoning, and then we can have a good, thorough discussion and hear from the public and everything like that before we make a final decision. But I'm enthusiastic about this. I want to see it go forward. I think it meets answers a lot of questions that we've asked about affordable housing and how to make rental housing work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marsden.
Thank you. I appreciate all the work that the proponent has done on this and staff in going back and forth. And I'll echo the comments of Councillor O'Neill. I think there's a lot of good things here. I think it addresses, is a step in the right direction towards addressing a rather pressing need in our city, and that's rental housing. So I do like a large number of the components here. A couple questions through the mayor to staff. With regards to the site coverage at 59%, that is above the 55% that's permitted under the RM3 zoning, correct? And is the excess solely attributable to the fact that there is the component above ground for the parkade, a slight protrusion?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, that is correct. It's only for the underground parking structure that is protruding above the finished ground.
And we do have precedents in that immediate area with regards to that type of exception with regards to the protrusion of underground. Is that correct? Or
yes, the neighboring property received a similar variance due to the site grading and the contamination issue, as well as the previous iteration of this project that went forward also received support for that variance.
Okay. So with this, you speak to the concerns with the common amenity space, and again, I agree with Councillor O'Neill when I think to rental units that I lived in over the years, market purpose-built rental typically didn't have an amenity space at all unless you referred to it as the laundry room. So there really wasn't anything beyond that. So I would really encourage staff to look at how we can work with the proponents to move this forward. I appreciate the recommendation before us is to send it back to staff to get it more consistent, but there was 4 options put forth to us on page 9, and I was leaning more towards hearing what the public had to say about this and going with option 1. Again, if it does come back to staff, if we were to move this as far as the recommendation, is there a time frame in which we might see this come back to us in the form of a recommendation with public hearing and the appropriate bylaws? Are we that far away in terms of what you'd like to see versus what's presented?
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. If the direction is simply for staff to prepare the bylaw based on this application and bring that back for council for consideration of first reading, then referral to public hearing, that can be done in fairly short order. Probably by later in the month or early December, I would imagine. If the inclination, though, is for staff to go back and work with the applicant to try to close the gap in terms of maybe reducing some of the variances, certainly we're quite keen to do that. I'm not sure how successful that would be and the timeline that would take. So we're fully prepared to explore that, pursue that if that is council's direction. But if you simply just want the bylaw back in first reading form and as it is now, that can be done in fairly short order.
The question with regards to the exception on the parking and the variance that's requested there, I take heart with regards to the fact that there may be some data that supports the fact that purpose-built rentals have fewer registered vehicles. It was something that I kind of felt, from a common sense perspective, made sense to me. They appear to have provided some data to indicate that. So the exemption or the variance in parking, I seem comfortable with. Staff themselves have said they're comfortable with the site coverage. Really, I don't know that there's a lot of glaring issues that we really want to delay further. I'd be more interested in seeing us move option 1, and that's ask staff to come back with a bylaw and public hearing. Okay. I don't know if it's appropriate through the mayor, Mr. Clerk. Is it appropriate? There's a motion on the floor. Is it appropriate to move the second one, or would we have to deal with the first one first?
The second one is the exact opposite of the first one, so you can't move an amendment that is the opposite of the motion on the floor. Okay.
So we have to defeat the first one and then come back with the second?
That's what would be required. Is the first one would have to fail on a vote.
And I won't be supporting the recommendation, so we can come back and ask this to go to public hearing. Thank you.
Okay. And how this works is I look at the last person on the list when I decide I want to speak. I look at the list, and the last person was Marston, and so I put myself next, just so that for Councillor Asman, I'm not jumping in front of him. I did want to. Yeah. Okay. But that's exactly what I was doing. I knew you were going to say some really intelligent things, and I wanted to be there first.
That's right.
The Dola. So I'm, as everyone knows, I'm passionate about rental housing. I have pushed hard for council to find the means of supporting the idea that rental housing gets built wherever we can without mandating it on particular sites because there are existing rental housing sites. In this case, or rather in most cases, I've talked about waiving the bonus density requirements for anything that's rental housing or at least contracted as rental housing. I spoke with the applicant on this one, and I said how much I would love to see rental housing. My challenge on this one then, and my challenge now, is 41 units of rental housing, and 36 of those units will have a parking space. And there's eight visitors parking spaces, and that's normal, and the applicant has actually specified that the 8 units would be for visitors, and 37, what is that, 33 units for, anyway, so 36 resident parking spaces for 41 units. my challenge is that's just not going to work. It's just not realistic. We're going to end up with people parking on the street, not just those 4 units or 5 units that don't have a parking space in the building, and there aren't 5 spaces to spare on the street. We've heard the last time an application was made on this street for a multifamily building that all kinds of concern about where will people park. When we adopted the possibility of flexibility on parking regulations related to transit, it was my understanding, and I think it was Council's presupposition, that would only apply in frequent transit corridors. The once every 1 hour bus that goes by my neighborhood, for example, on a weekend, that doesn't constitute near transit, or else 3/4 of Coquitlam is near transit other than Burke Mountain. Because there's a bus that goes by it at some point in the day for a little bit of time. It is intended, I think, that we have a frequent transit corridor so that people would be willing to not have a vehicle, not have a second vehicle in most families. But in this case, we're anticipating that 5 of the units don't even have the first vehicle. And I don't think we're there yet. So I do want to, and I recognize the challenges of being next to a gas station that has had its leakage over the years, and therefore created the challenge with building more underground parking. But I'm struggling. The amenity space is irrelevant to the people of Coquitlam. It's only relevant to 41 units inside this building. And if you don't like the amenity space, don't rent a unit in that building, I suspect. So I don't have a problem with the amenities, and I think we should probably look to finding a way to revise our amenity requirements to deal specifically with purpose-built rental buildings. I agree on that front. I'm left with, and I have no problem with the other flexibility related to the above-grade parking and that sort of stuff. Again, it doesn't affect the neighborhood in the way that not having enough parking. This is a dead-end street, or sort of. There's no place else to go. If you can't find a parking space in front of this building, you end up cheating and parking over perhaps in the shopping center or across the street in the church and then jaywalking. To me, that's a disaster if we do that sort of thing. So I think I will support almost anything to try to get purpose-built rental housing built in our community, but I can't. But how does that song go? I will do anything, but I won't do that. Councillor Zerillo. Sorry, was that Councillor Asmussen is what I meant. Sorry, A to Z. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you. I like this project. We have complained and heard for a long time about the need for more market rental in this community. I think what has been stated, that this proposal is not asking for any involvement of the city in helping with waiving of fees or any other support financially for the support or subsidies to this project. They said by doing this amount, we will do this completely. They will put on a housing agreement for 40 years at this, at least, or net range with the staff, that it will stay as a rental housing that won't be sold off as units in a later time. So I think my concern when I seconded Councillor Reid's proposal on 2 was that staff wanted to review some of the numbers and justification within the proponent's proposal today. And my thought was that could only take about a week and should be back to us quite quickly. And because people had some concerns in the report and wanted some justification, made sure that the numbers presented today were correct and accurate to council before we moved ahead. I think there are some issues, though, I do want to raise here, that when we talk about having affordable housing market rentals close to transit stations, the difficulty in that was we have to come in with subsidy funding because that land is going to be the most expensive land there is to try and put market rental on. And you're seeing throughout the region, cities can't do that or having great difficulty without a lot of government assistance of waiving of fees, density bonus give backs, all sorts of different things to try and make that work. Where this application isn't asking for that. As for transit, this has a bus that's quite frequent almost. It's going to get more frequent because of the development in that area right now. The ride from this location is only about 8 minutes to Lougheed Mall. It's not like you're going from one end of the city over to the other end of the city. It's a very quick ride for people there and back. And even today, between Lougheed Mall, Glen Eyre is a very busy, with a lot of people moving through there. So that's my one consideration, that I think we're being unrealistic when we say that we want market rentals all within a close proximity of transit stations. I think there's a lot of great difficulties with that. There's going to have to be a lot of give back by the cities, like we did with Blue Sky, where we gave back allowed them to go higher without charging them density bonus, extra space to make that work for the market rental building. So when we do that, we have to move on things to make that work. They're not asking for anything like this.
Just to be clear, I didn't say transit stations, I said frequent transit corridors.
Yes, but during the peak periods, this does actually, 15 minutes considered a frequent transit corridor. I think as Councillor O'Neill pointed out, is 10 minutes during certain periods. And so,
but even their parking study referred to it as having some transit. It doesn't say it has significant transit.
no,
But anyway,
we can debate that. But I'm just saying the fact of the matter that this is a very close proximity to the station. It's not a long ways away from a station, and to get to that station is. We also had, just to Councillor Marsden's point, that also the Austin high-rise before Austin North Road is going to have a parking garage out of the ground, and it's going to be screened and everything. So we've had different parts where the variance has been out of the ground. I would like to staff to have a more open mind. That's why I was going to sit back. When I listened to Mr. McIntyre's comments, I was maybe I've misconstrued the comments that seemed like, well, it may go back, but staff isn't going to change their opinion on some of the suggestions made by the proponents and in the region. And it just seemed to me kind of, maybe for Mr. McIntyre, is there some rigidity here? Or I just felt that when you said it back, we would probably still have the same position. Is it strictly on the parking, or because I just want to find that out.
If I could, Your Worship, no, try not to be too rigid in my thinking and my position. No, a couple things there. There was a package that was provided today at the Council and Committee, and there's a lot of information in here. This is the first time we saw it was this afternoon, so if we were to review that and analyze that and comment on that, that would take a bit of time, because there's a dozen projects in other areas of the municipality, or in other municipalities across the region we have to get into, so that would take some time. No, my comments were around if the direction was for staff to go back and to work with the applicant to see if there was some way to close the gap between the two positions, that, try to reduce the variances, try to make it more consistent with the zoning, try to maybe apply some flexibility around the amenity area. I think that would take some time. I don't think it's just because staff would go into those discussions with a fixed position. But I think just knowing this project and the applicant's approach on it, I think it would take some time to work through that. There's also some policy challenges too, like just we'd have to go back and think about how the bylaw would be worded to enable additional density on this site because it's a rental housing project. It's not impossible, it can be done, but that would take a little bit of time as well.
Would it be possible for staff by the council meeting on the 23rd to have an analysis done of the information on their proposal today?
I'm sorry, Your Worship, there's a lot of material there. We're extremely busy right now, and you'd have to go through and be phoning other municipalities and finding out about these specific projects, going online, checking the other zoning. It's a fair bit of work to that. I'm sorry.
Because I think that from the proponents told us this afternoon that they're pro formers based on this to make this work. If we reduce it, the project's dead and they're gone. We're not going to get market rental. So we're going to be back to a site that is going to be developed as either a residential condo development of some sort. There will be increased density on that site, maybe with what the parking is, but we may have a bigger parking problem there just because those people will have more cars than what the study showed as having renters. So I just find it that we've got an application here that we know if we reduce the impacts, proponents told us that it's dead. It's not going to be, we won't get this market rental in this place because it won't work for them. And they were quite clear on that. So I don't know where the room to go back is.
Again, through the chair, staff is always very pleased to see market rental housing proposals as well. And we try to make those successful. I think in fairness, though, in this case, we look at all the factors in consideration, and we feel there's some other concerns that do arise.
Well, I'll leave it at that. Let others speak. Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Zarrillo.
Well, thank you. I often ask for innovation when I'm sitting in this chair, and this one seems innovative to me. I'd like to float it out to the community. I'd like to see it go to first reading and get the community's input. We can debate it here forever, but I'd like to see what the community has to say about this. With that in mind, I would like to see the coverage go down to 55%. And on a personal note, I'd like to see more studio apartments in there. I think that much of our youth is looking to move out, and it would be wonderful if they could get out into studio apartments in the neighborhoods that they grew up in. I did mention earlier today that I have some concerns about the retail lot that is being used right now for people that live on Charland in the multifamily, so I'd want some information about that. Also, some fact checking, really mostly related to the parking for Gibbons. There was some examples in the booklet that we got today about forgivance in parking in other cities in the Lower Mainland. I'm wondering if they are getting money in lieu of those parking reductions. So I'd like to know that if this goes to public hearing. And lastly, I'd like to say this would be a wonderful location for bicycles. I know it says like 35 is the bicycle score for this location, but I have to say this is a straight shot to Lougheed Transit Station. The incline is not terrible if you're biking, and I think this could be a really nice block for young people, but I'll leave that for the community to tell us if this goes to first reading. Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. Just wanted to, I guess, a lot of us have commented on transit and how this is on a corridor that's fairly well serviced. We haven't given you a chance to give us your opinion on that. Obviously, you had some concerns about that. So could you tell us why you didn't think this was a high enough frequency for transit?
Thank you, through the chair. As has been previously discussed in the evening, we talked about proximity to transit stations and rapid transit, and as well as frequent transit networks. Given that it was not located in close proximity to a transit station or frequent transit network, we didn't feel that it was sufficient.
But like Councillor O'Neill said, I mean, that's not, it just says proximity to transit, right? And we all agree that we're never going to get affordable rental housing close to a transit station because of the cost of the land. So in my mind, I always assumed that the Austin Heights area is a perfect place for this type of development because it is so quick and easy to get to Lougheed Mall, to get to the to the SkyTrain station. And to me, this is as good as you're going to get when it comes to transit for a market rental building, I'm thinking. No? Outside of one that's part of a large condo development like we saw with the Blue Sky, but a standalone purpose-built market rental housing unit, to me, this is the ideal transit situation. It's probably as good as we're going to get.
Your Worship, certainly there's a bus line that goes up and down Austin. I think if you walk up to the corner, you can probably crane your head and probably see the SkyTrain station down at the bottom of the hill. So it's there. It's not within the TDS area. It's not within the core or shoulder area of a transit station. In those areas, the zoning bylaw does provide for some fairly significant reductions in parking. It wouldn't apply here. So we have this, staff has to follow the bylaw. And I think what's being requested in terms of the parking relaxation is greater than what would be enabled in those TDS areas. So we've also been part of applications in this immediate neighborhood where there's been concerns raised around parking. So we're just trying to be forthright and put all the factors out there.
No, I get it. And, you know, the parking study that was presented to us, you know, looks very compelling, but it's mostly in areas on a SkyTrain line or very close to a SkyTrain line. So I'm not 100% sure, you know, if we're comparing apples to apples. But when I look at the city of North Vancouver, and their parking requirements for market rental, they're quite low. Have we had a chance to check with North Vancouver to see if they've had any issues with this, or is it a relatively new change that they have?
Your Worship, we, if it's council's interest to advance this through to public hearing, that'll give us some time. We can go and do that checking with other municipalities. Again, we just received the material today, so we haven't had that opportunity to go and talk with other staff at other municipalities to see how these parking standards are working in those locations. We can do that if we have sufficient time.
Right. And the Councillor Marsden's just pointed out the ICBC vehicle registration data of other rental buildings in the area, right? And so it seems to me that it is less than a 1-to-1 ratio. So for me, it's mainly about parking, and if we can figure out, you know, an accurate number of parking stalls required, that's the solution. What if instead of requiring 8 visitor spots, you required 4 visitor spots, and you moved the other 4 visitor spots to regular tenant spots? So then you almost have a 1-to-1. Obviously, you'd have less visitor parking, but it seems to me the frequency of visitor parking might be less of a strain on a neighborhood than a full-time spot.
Mr. Jarvie.
Thank you, through your worship. In previous discussions with the applicant, they've provided that the parking study, and in Metro Vancouver, as part of the parking study that's been done region-wide, one of the recommended parking rates for visitor was 0.1 spaces per unit. That was part of their previous discussion. However, we don't have that policy in place here in the city right now. Our parking rate was 0.2. As part of their study, though, they did recommend a 0.1.
Right. If we were to go with recommendation number 1 and go to a public hearing, and so go to first reading, and then we had a public hearing, and and then we denied it at the public hearing. They have to wait 6 months to come back. Is that the correct time frame?
Yes, that is correct.
So there are consequences to doing that, rather than sending it to staff to have them try to find a middle ground, like you say. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the technical answer to the last question actually was that as well, you can refer back at after second and third, or even after the public hearing, referring it back to staff and subsequently getting a staff report, potentially offering to allow us to withdraw if the applicant chooses to withdraw the application. It does create a no man's time when we can't talk about it, but there are ways to avoid the 6 months if the application gets withdrawn prior to failure, I guess is the question. Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, Your Worship, that's very perceptive. You're correct. Following the public hearing, there's a number of options for council. You can either approve the bylaw, it proceeds on. You can decline the bylaw, it's defeated. In that case, because of the Development Approval Procedures bylaw, there would be that 6-month cooling off period, if you will. Or the bylaw could be referred back to staff with direction. In one of those scenarios, and this happens on rare occasion, is it might be a request for a change in how the the development is structured. I mean, it's a request for a reduction in density of the project. There can be direction given back to staff following the public hearing as one outcome.
Councillor Reid,
Thank you.
just 1 second, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. The reason I wanted this to go back to staff is because I think that we have to look at some sort of inducements to get rental housing, and I don't think this will be the last rental housing application we ever have. The people that we're working for right now, folks, are the people that actually live in our community. They live on the streets below these buildings. They live on the streets around this, but not close enough. And they're going to have cars parked all over the place. We are taking the lives of the neighborhoods that are already there and substantially changing them if we don't provide the necessary parking. So are we going to have 41 or 45 suites and they'll never have a visitor? They're going to be awfully lonesome people because they are going to have visitors. And those visitors in this particular instance are only going to be able to park on Charland because we don't want them running across the 4-lane road to the church parking lot. And I can assure you the church will soon be putting up no parking signs because they need their parking for other things. I do know that the building, I think that Councillor Zerillo referred to, where the pub is and Rona and that, they are mighty sick of all the people from the current apartment parking illegally in their lot just for extra parking. That's not fair. That's not fair to the current residents we have here. My biggest concern here is that we should be working for the residents, not for just the developers. We are into the old part of Coquitlam that we are redeveloping. This is one of the first to come through for rental housing in an area where there's lots of rental housing now. And I think you will be seeing within the next 5 and 10 years a lot of the turnover in some of the rental buildings. Once we set a precedent, you can't tell me that the people on Howie who are 2 blocks away from the bus aren't close either. So I think we just have to, we really have to think this out. I am all for giving inducements for rental housing, absolutely. But I've also heard people around here saying it's affordable housing. And I want to correct that because every time we say affordable housing in here, some people think it's the subsidized housing and some people think somebody's affordable housing is subsidized. There is subsidized housing, there is affordable housing, which is usually have some other group tied to it that they can pay some of it. And this is rental housing. This is market rental housing. We need it, no doubt about it. There are inducements we could perhaps be using, but I think we need to send this back to staff so that they get the inducements right and something that we are going to be able to offer other folks coming forward with similar applications to this in the old part of Coquitlam. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Towner.
Thank you. Okay, since I've been elected, I'm closing in on a year now. There's 2 dominant themes here around the council table. One is that we need rental housing in Coquitlam. We've lost a whole bunch of it, or we will be losing a whole bunch of it up in the Coquitlam area, and that land is very expensive because it's right next to the SkyTrain line. So when I consider that, I think this location for rental housing is a good location. It's still on transit. You can walk to the grocery store, the pharmacy, the banks, the coffee shops. But another dominant theme around this council table is parking. Pretty much every development that is, I think 100% of the developments that have come across this table since I've been here, there's been discussion about parking. Even the big lots that we talked about tonight, we talked about parking. So I have major concerns with parking. Charland already, we've heard lots of concerns with Charland. There's no parking on Blue Mountain. And as Councillor Reid just said, there's housing right below there. But if it's true that tenants who rent truly don't own as many vehicles, maybe this is a very good project. We have to get creative to get more rental developments in Coquitlam. We need rental developments in our city, and I commend the applicant for getting creative to bring this type of housing to Coquitlam. So on that, I'm wondering, I don't know if anybody can even answer this, in the whole theme of being creative, is there any way that when they're almost rented, that the last 5 that you rent out, you say there's no parking for you? I mean, there's 8 visitor spots, so that to me seems reasonable. If the first 25 units have 1 car each and there's no more parking, can they be rented out saying, advertised, there's no parking? And so truly people who move in don't have cars. I don't know if that's feasible, but I am definitely leaning towards hearing from the public, sending this to public hearing and hearing what they have to say. So, thank you.
Okay, Councillor O'Neill has asked to speak a second time to clarify something. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. I think I sort of made a mistake in the way I approached this at the beginning, and I was assuming that number 4, if we pass that, would open the gate to staff taking a look at their hardline position and doing some negotiation. But the more I heard, staff says, no, we have these rules. We really can't be that flexible. We've got all these rules and regulations in place. We have these policies. And of course, the wording of number 4 is all incumbent on the proponents to change their proposal to make sure it's more consistent. So insofar as my comments or questions, we're supporting number 4 under the now, I see, false assumption that it would lead to sort of a negotiation process. I want to withdraw those because the points that I made were intended to try to loosen staff up here. But I think I heard from staff they can't really move. They've got all these policies. So I will be voting against the motion, number 4. And I presume that will then lead to staff coming back with a report, first reading, that they will not recommend. They won't. How can they recommend it? And then we will say, and then council will have to decide based on that whether or not we go forward and send it to public hearing. And at that stage, we hear from the public, and then finally, after that is over, then we get to make a final decision on it. Now, between now and let's say number 1 ends up passing, between now, number 1, and then the public hearing, there's going to be several more weeks, and that would give, I would think, staff a fair bit of time to start finding some of the information out, checking out what the report that we received over this afternoon from the proponents, if that all holds water, and those questions can be raised at the public hearing, and by then, staff should be prepared, I would think. I'd be disappointed if they weren't. So there we go. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Wilson.
Can our staff comment on the report that was included as attachment 5, page 6, where it looks at the vehicle ownership rates of the apartments that are nearby? And if they have a problem with that, if they could explain what the problem they have with it is. No.
One traffic study. The faded one.
I realize it wasn't a study that the city commissioned, so it's the proponent commissioned the study. But is there any arguments you have with that study?
Thank you, through your worship. As part of this study, it was in discussions with staff in some of the earlier application processing where we talked to the applicant about finding a regionally and a neighborhood-specific report that looked at the properties in the nearby area that were rentals and what the existing vehicle ownership data was. In taking that, they hired Bunt and went through and looked at the parking in those buildings, and it's been reviewed by planning staff as well as our transportation planning staff. And their transportation planning staff didn't have a problem with the methodology used as part of the study, and that they realized that the deductions made in the study were, I guess, technically sound. From the staff perspective, again, we don't have any parking rates based on property tenure. So we don't have a specific parking rate for rental versus strata, and per our regulations, there was no distinction.
So, and I got to say, I'm trying not to question your decisions. I'm trying to understand your decisions, and it's sounding more and more like you feel like your hands are tied. And because we haven't come up with our housing affordability strategy, because we don't have rental policy, you feel like this is the best you can do. Is that accurate? Like this is your job to defend the city's rules, and because
Actually, their job is to enforce the city rules, not to defend them.
Oh, sorry,
Our job is to defend them.
Not to defend them, yes.
He's defending them now to us, which is maybe not fair, but yeah, okay, enforce them. Yeah, sorry.
Through the chair, we're not just gatekeepers. There's bylaws we should follow, but we also vary. Like how often do we come forward to council with proposals that are creative solutions? In this case, and I'm saddened that there's an impression that we are being totally inflexible and that we don't think there's any movement. We could certainly go back and talk again with the applicant. I just get the sense, though, that based on what I heard them say today and the material I see them submit, I'm not sure how much flex there would be. We could look at how you would arrange the parking allocation. Maybe many spaces is not necessary. Maybe there's additional room for bike parking. There may be a number of avenues to explore. I'm not starting from a point of confidence we'd get somewhere in those sort of discussions. But if that's council's direction, we would do it. We'd give it our best shot. If there's an interest in getting some further information, because we did receive some material today, some questions around the reports we have attached, we can look at that as well. If the direction from council is to come back with a bylaw ready for first reading, and we can have that done within 2 weeks, and then that sets a public hearing date from thereafter. That gives us sufficient time to look at the material that we've received, and we can provide a commentary on it. In the meantime, we can talk with the applicant and see if there's any possible movement at all in trying to address some of the issues. But at this point, I guess what I'm just trying to convey is that I think they've said, this is it, this is what we want, this is what we want to go forward with.
And I appreciate that, and I want you to know that I don't think you're being inflexible. I think sometimes you're far too flexible. So I think in this case, I'm not complaining about that. I'm just trying to understand it. But going back to the page 6 of the Bunt report, if our staff is comfortable with that, then to me that makes the parking issue not as important anymore, because this study has shown that most likely you won't have that many cars parked there. So most of us think the transit is okay. Most of us are okay with the site coverage. I think we're okay with the amenity space. If staff is okay with the parking ratios.
I only add the caveat that it may well be that the rental mix, the socioeconomic realities of a brand new rental building are different from the socioeconomic realities of a 40-year-old rental building, in the same way that those that buy a brand new condo are very different from those that buy, and that any company cars that someone drives home aren't registered here, and I know people that drive the company vehicle home. So those two caveats, and that's
So-
about
so
it.
the-
I did notice that our engineer, who has some traffic and parking realities to perhaps share, wanted to weigh in on that. Mr. Giozeghi.
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly wouldn't want to dispute the inflexibility at our planning department. Rather, I'd like to focus on the flexibility of the engineering department. And I think it's relevant to know that the Transportation Planning Division of ours followed closely the parking study provided by Bond. We agreed with the methodology and the results and the recommendations. And I'd like to add that it's a fairly unique case where transportation planning has been consulting with our planning colleagues, and we recommend not to have assigned parking stalls in the building for the renters. That would mean that first come, first serve, they can come in and they can park the car, whichever resident's stall is available, irrespective of the visitor stalls, obviously. And further, we also would like to make as a requirement that residents, tenants, would not be able to store their bicycles at the end of the parking stalls, because that would get the impression that those stalls are assigned to somebody. So what we want is, we would like to see an enclosed area, or at least a secure area for anyone's bicycles, and unassigned parking stalls for the tenants, and X number of designated parking stalls for visitors only.
And you're not flexible on that. Okay, go ahead.
Well, and I just wanted to mention that in the Bunt report, they did inflate the parking requirements by 10% for vehicles that weren't registered to tenants in the building. So that might take into account the concern you had about people driving company cars. But definitely, I see your point about, you know, a newer building maybe attracting people who might have more vehicle ownership. And I do like the idea of not designating parking stalls, because I think that would allow a little bit more flexible use. But then my worry is that if you have to have a bike enclosure, then you're probably going to take up 3 parking spots for a bike enclosure.
No, usually in those corners you can't park in anyway.
I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Okay. So right now we've got a motion that's been seconded by someone who's going to vote against it, and we're going to call a question. That's the motion is to ask staff to look at it again. That motion's before us. All in favor? All opposed? That motion is opposed by Councillors O'Neill, Zerillo, Marsden, Towner, and Asmundson. That motion fails. Seeing no option 1 has been moved. Option 1 is to have staff prepare a first reading report for council's consideration. Any discussion on that? Seeing none. All in favor? Same folks. All opposed? Same folks. Councillors Reid, Wilson, and myself are opposed. The motion carries. Okay, so just for information, that should take a couple of days to get that out. How long before we can see a first reading report? I know I just want to confirm that. I won't hold you to it necessarily, but...
Sorry, Worship, just checking with my my team here. Yeah, no, we can be back. I think the next meeting is Monday, November 23rd. It's also public hearing night, but there's a council meeting following with a brief first reading report, and that would put us on track for the December 14th public hearing. And we could then have time to look into some of the information that's been submitted and provide that through the public hearing brief.
Here you go. Okay. Hope that works for you. Okay. Here we go. Mr. Clarke.
Next item, item 10 is a Heritage Revitalization Agreement Bylaw number 4626 and a Heritage Designation Bylaw 4627 for a 3-lot subdivision and heritage restoration of Edward Davies House, currently at 1154 Rochester Avenue. Staff recommendation, the council give first reading to see Coquitlam Heritage Revitalization Agreement Authorization Bylaw 4626. First reading to see Coquitlam Heritage Designation Bylaw 4627. And the bylaws number 4626 and 4627 be referred to public hearing.
Moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Towner, and Councillor O'Neill, and one other, I think. Councillor Wilson.
My question was, do we have many new developments where we have 30-foot lots?
Sorry.
30-foot wide lots. It seems to me, the 10 meters was sort of the smallest that I've seen on my time on council. I didn't have time to do a bunch of research, but this one is proposing 30-foot lots, and I'm just wondering, is that?
I don't know that we have that many. It's a normal function. There's been lots in Surrey done that are as narrow as 26 feet. With 18-foot houses and that sort of thing. 30 is a little bit snugger than obviously the 10-meter one, which would be 33 and a bit. Mr. Dhaliwal.
Through your worship, yes, 33 feet is the smallest lot that we traditionally had in Coquitlam right now in the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Motion is first reading in a public hearing. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Item 11 pertains to development cost charges bylaw number 4607. Staff recommendations that council give first, second, and third readings to development cost charges bylaw number 4607.
Moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Asmundson. Councillor Asmundson.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be moving this forward. The development cost charge bylaw is a bylaw that is under provincial legislation. But once again, through this, we are protecting our costs, but we're also, once again, pushing up the cost of housing. And we had a discussion before about CACs, which aren't under provincial legislation, but what will add to the housing cost again. So I think when we do these things, we have to look at them all the time in the fullness of all the charges and costs, because we do have an effect at our level on affordability of housing. But this report has been done with consultation. It also has to get approval from the province coming back, and there's strict set parameters around it, and our staff have done a tremendous job on the work with their consultant on this and the work that's been done. And I thank them for that. So I will move this. I just want to make those comments about affordability and housing. Thank you.
Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm glad Councillor Asmundson made the point of relating this to our very recent CAC discussion, the Community Amenities Contribution, which is kind of a homegrown DCC in a way, and its impact on housing affordability. And we had a really good discussion about that last week. And you could probably make some of the same points here. My concern, and I guess it's is about the city's automatic assumption to go forward with saying, well, how do we find new ways to get extra money, rather than looking back to say and asking, well, of all the policies that this council and the previous council and the previous council and the previous council passed, and all the decisions that they made, when added up, are they now putting such a cost burden on us that we should start relooking at some of those things? And as with the CACs, with these things here, apparently the driver for these increased DCCs is the park space and how expensive parks are. And we're committed to having X number of parks of this X quality and everything like that. And the council hasn't been asked, do you really want to do this? Because here's the consequence. Here's the consequence. All we've been asked is, here's the consequence. Do you think we should go through with this? Because if we don't, we won't have enough money to do what we're supposed to be doing. So I know that in the letter attachment 3 from the UDI, on the first page there of their letter, they talk about at the October 6th meeting, several potential long-term mitigation strategies were discussed, including more cooperation between municipalities and school boards. Well, we are actually cooperating. Having park standards based on proximity rather than populations, focusing on building better parks as opposed to just more parks, and having some parks outside of the urban containment boundary where land is cheaper. UDI says they agree with staff that a regional dialogue involving the province is needed. UDI would be interested in participating in such a dialogue. That seemed to be the strongest opinion that UDI expressed. They didn't say, go back to square one, folks, we can't afford this. So, I think the points that the UDI made were very similar to the points that I had coming into this and points that I've expressed to my council colleagues before about us not kind of taking a look at what we're doing that's driving these costs up. I really hope that we do take a strong look at this. And as Councillor Asmussen pointed out, this is a step in the process. It has to go to the province and everything like that. And I won't be voting against this, but I really want us to start looking at a process that we might embrace to take a look at some of these really big, deeper questions that involve the driving forward and the driving upward of everything, of all our costs. And I think the UDI's suggestion is a really good one here, and maybe we can start that process internally and not have to wait for a regional or provincial discussion about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you. I will be supporting this moving forward. Again, I think it hasn't been looked at since 2012. Councillor O'Neill has stolen much of the thunder I had in referencing the UDI letter. In looking back previously at some interaction, some responses from the Urban Development Institute, they'd been a little firmer in expressing their concerns. This one, it really said, you know what, this is the big area, this is parks, that's where the exponential growth is going, and so we'd like you to take a look at that. I would agree with Councillor O'Neill that I think it would be a good idea to take a look at that, in part as well because it's some information and feedback we've heard from residents. We look at the greenfield that is Burke Mountain and the number of parks that are up there, and the comment's been made, perhaps more parks per capita than anywhere in North America by the time it's finished in terms of sheer number of parks. That said, a lot of residents are saying, you know what, it's nice to have all these parks, but make them bigger. Give us a bigger park, make it a more useful park. And that's a huge challenge for our Parks and Rec department. But I think it's a challenge that I would welcome them taking on and seeing what would that dialogue look like. So perhaps a question to our General Manager of Parks and Rec, would you concur with a need to have some discussion and look at other options that might enable you in delivering the services at the high level that you do on a more cost-effective manner? Mr. Chair?
I was reading one of the element of the your question was directed at Mr. Alueva wants to answer your questions.
He does. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just want to clarify that certainly I am also of the view that the time that I've spent with UDI and developing these bylaws in my career, this is probably the most positive response we've had from UDI. In fact, what UDI comments here are actually our comments around what has driven this program. So they concur that the flexibility we are providing to develop parks that are built on partnerships, they're built on not hard standards but guidelines, that they're utilizing those partnerships, that we are actually focusing on optimizing lands, not building on standards that might take our municipality to a place that is not cost effective. So they're actually echoing what our comments are and how what the balance is in building a balanced program that is sustainable long term. So just to comment, this is reflective of the very good discussion we had. We're in agreement that these are fundamental principles, that it's no longer about standards of population, but in fact, it's a variety of elements that create a park system.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So as I said, I'll be supporting this moving forward. I think it's a marginal increase when you look at the overall cost of a lot at this particular point in time. The increase in DCCs associated with this, given they haven't been revisited since 2012, is perhaps the smallest increase that we've seen in lot valuation since then. I guess it's something I said, and Gary didn't like it.
Oh, no.
So I won't take it personally. He never quotes me in the press anyways. So I thank you very much.
I was going to attribute it to the fact that I was next speaker.
Oh, so it was directed at you then?
That's right.
Craig's not here. That's a better chance he'll get in this week.
Okay. I'd added myself one person too late. I will be supporting this. My challenge, and I've always said it, that my main issue with changes to the DCCs isn't the size of the change, but rather the timing of it, and whether or not someone who's already acquired the land and is putting forward applications for the rezoning of that land is considered under the old DCC rate or the new DCC rate. And in fact, Ms. McMullen from UDI says essentially the same thing in her letter. She said, it is our understanding that developers with rezoning, development permit, or building permit applications into the city would have a year after the new DCC bylaws is adopted to obtain a building permit to pay the previous DCC rates. Now, it is our understanding that developers with rezoning or DP applications in would have a year. And I see Mr. McIntyre nodding and putting his finger up as though he wants to put a caveat on his nod. And then I go back to the staff report, because the staff report on page 6, timing of implementation, the second last paragraph, accordingly, the new DCC bylaw rates will not apply to any subdivision or building permit for which an application has been received by the city before the effective date, providing that it meets the application requirements set in the bylaw, which essentially says if you've only got your zoning, or you already applied for zoning, but you haven't got your zoning and you haven't applied for a building permit, therefore you are subject to the new rates. So you're nodding at this one too. Okay, Mr. McIntyre, you clearly agree with both of those scenarios.
Thank you, Worship, and let me try to help explain and understand that, because the letter is addressed to me. I received it and I was reading through it, and I then had a look at the bylaw. I was talking with Sheena last week and had a look at the bylaw, and I fortunately had an opportunity today to chat with Raul, because he's part of the project team, and he just clarified for me. So what the city's done, I think actually we've taken some really high ground here. For applications in process, traditionally subdivision applications in process had a 1-year grace period from the date the DCC bylaw was adopted. And that goes back many, many years ago, like back when we updated the bylaw back in 2007. At that time, I think the request of the UDI and the development community was, well, we know the legislation provides for that, but how about other applications in stream for building permits? And I think if you recall, back in 2007, 2008, we sort of above and beyond that one grace period for subdivisions, we also extend that for building permit applications in process. So now I think the legislation's caught up with that. Now what's being done, it's not just for subdivision applications and building permit applications received before the effective date of the bylaw, but it's for what are called precursor applications. So that is if someone has a rezoning application or a development permit application that's upstream of a building permit, as long as that's in before the effective date of the bylaw, DCC bylaw, and then they have that 1 year grace period to complete that rezoning DP plus the building permit application, they'd then still be paying under the old rates. So that's, it's just taking it to the next level in terms of extending that grace period.
Okay, and that's what I thought, and then I read that paragraph of the staff report, and the staff report doesn't say that.
I was a little curious about that too, and that's why I spoke with Raul this afternoon, just to clarify, because I was reading the letter, I was reading the bylaw, and I just needed some confirmation from the project team members.
Okay, because I don't read it in the bylaw either. So I'll go to Councillor Zarrillo.
Oh, thank you. I don't need to speak. Thank you.
You're actually down here twice.
Because I tried to turn it off.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, now it's Councillor Zarrillo now. Councillor Asmussen. Councillor Asmussen.
Just a point of clarification, we talked, as mentioned, about Burke Mountain and the amount of park space up there. A lot of the park space is also SPIA area or protected area within Burke Mountain also, but also Burke Mountain is not the cost driver for a lot of the land up there, because a lot of the development up there also has the 5% charge, where every subdivision over 3 lots pays 5% of the value or the land towards park space. So it contributes greatly to its own development of the park in that area and supplies park funds that can be used in other areas. So that was just a clarification on the Burke Mountain. One of the biggest cost drivers for parks will be in the Coquitlam Lougheed area for the acquisition of any expansion of parks in that area.
And actually, on that point, there, for example, is an application that will be at the next public hearing related to, and for some people, they've talked about the size of the park and wanting the park to be bigger up in Burke Mountain. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges, is that Councillor Asmussen just said, there's all kinds of parkland up in Burke Mountain, and there's lots of structures that create more revenue for more parkland. And, well, the same thing happens in Coquitlam as well. We take 5% of the land in the redevelopment of a parcel in Burke Mountain, or in Coquitlam and in Millardville and anywhere in the city. But it generates less revenue in those other areas than certainly than it does in Burke Mountain. The reality, though, is that our real needs for parkland are not in Burke Mountain. Our real needs for additional parkland are in Millardville, in central Coquitlam, in Coquitlam, on the entire the southwest area of Coquitlam, the old Coquitlam, where our park ratios per square kilometer are much, much lower than they are in Burke Mountain or in Western Plateau, both of which have very high park ratios per square kilometer, acreage per square kilometer. And I actually wouldn't mind seeing those ratios for the various areas of Coquitlam at some point, because I think one of the challenges we've got is how do we manage, and we looked in this report and we see the anticipation of the acquisition of significant parklands in, as Councillor Asmussen just said, Coquitlam, Lougheed, Lower Lougheed, Millardville, of course. That's where we're short. That's where the gaps in parkland acquisition have existed or are traditional. And I think having access to those numbers, the ratio of parkland acres per square kilometer, would be, I think, really helpful in guiding council, or at least in allowing council to have the full information as they move forward with park acquisition. Seeing no other speakers, Development Cost Charge Bylaw, first 3 readings. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Your Worship, that's the last formal item on this agenda.
Okay, I do want to, on behalf of council, acknowledge on Wednesday is Remembrance Day, when we will all take a moment to pause and contemplate the sacrifices that so many have made, so many that continue to make in the cause of freedom in this country and in other countries. We just had a federal election which underscored the realities of freedom and the fact that people from around the world, perhaps 50% of our population here in Coquitlam right now, have moved here within their lifetime, were born in another country, and in many cases, moved here for the very freedoms that were fought for by so many, and for which so many gave their lives. So we invite you all to attend the city's Remembrance Day ceremony at Como Lake Middle School at 10 a.m. We'll try for 10 a.m. Get you a seat in the gym, and then over at 11 a.m. at the Cenotaph at Blue Mountain Park on Wednesday. The motion to adjourn was by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Marsden. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Question period. Up to 50 minutes on any items on tonight's agenda. Do you have any questions on tonight's agenda? Any questions at all on tonight's agenda? No? No? No. Lots of questions, but none you want to pose. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.